This show contains explicit language and themes and is for entertainment only. We do not guarantee the accuracy of our content. This podcast is not for sensitive individuals, ideological or religious extremists, or little bitches. Your Lord inspired the angels. I am with you, so support those who believe. I will cast terror into the hearts of those who disbelieve. So strike above the necks, and strike off every fingertip of theirs. The Quran, Surah 8, verse 12.
Welcome to the Unholy Generation podcast. We are your host, two second-degree atheists from the Illuminati Atheist Order. I'm your host, Brother Michael.
And I'm fucking Baphomet. Now, okay, so guys, I don't usually look at the notes for this part, but I just saw that Michael actually put all that shit in the notes. Oh, God. I'm trying to make this a serious show. And
the fuck you are. The fuck you are. Come on now. That's like a fucking lie.
You're undermining our credibility, Michael.
In the last episode, you said Mel's cheesy dick. What credibility are you talking about? This isn't hard-hitting journalism we're doing here.
Michael, you're limiting our potential.
Our second episode, the most popular episode, was called Faith Balls.
That's ambiguous. Okay.
We spent an entire episode on the Mormons, on how an angel stole a bunch of stuff.
Okay. All right, enough. Serious pace. All right, so this is part 3 of our Mormon episode, and this is going to be our last one of our interactions with the Mormon missionaries. There's probably going to be some other Mormon stuff afterwards, but this is the last for that. Let's get into it.
So after we got past that little bit of uncomfortable atmosphere, we then started to have a conversation about the devil. And my question was like, what role does the devil play? And then they told us about the pre-life council in heaven and, you know, the decision on who was going to be the savior, Jesus or Lucifer. And basically what happened was they were discussing how they were going to bring people from earth back into heaven. And the goal was to get as many people to come back to heaven as possible. And yet they put veils over their minds so that they couldn't remember that heaven existed. And they couldn't remember that they had to follow all the rules and do all this stuff to get there. But they still wanted to maximize the number of people that got there, if that makes any fucking sense. So
it doesn't. So I didn't know anything about this, and when I heard this, I was like, "Whoa, this is fucking batshit, man!"
I know, and it gets worse. So the goal here is to get as many people back into heaven as possible. So what Lucifer says is, okay, if that's the goal, wouldn't the best plan of action be to not let them have free will and just make them believe, so that way they'll all come back?
Seems logical.
Right? Seems logical. And then Jesus is like, nah, they should have free will, so they should be able to choose whether or not they come back. And after some deliberation, they decided to go with Jesus's plan. Lucifer was all pissed off, so he, takes a third of the angels with him, and then there's the big heaven war, and the Archangel Michael casts him down into hell. And now, basically, Lucifer is just being spiteful. Like, his whole role is to try to take away free agency and kind of drag you down with him, sort of deal. So he just tries to, tempt people and tries to make them not keep the commandments and not believe in God and stuff. But interesting fact, he's actually not in hell. He is in what is called the outer darkness. Hell is a different realm, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So he is in the outer darkness.
Okay, so
Yeah.
That sounds like Star Trek, but...
Yeah.
So, basically, there was a board meeting in heaven.
Yeah.
and they had this, they had to come up with plans, and Jesus's plan won out. So Satan got mad, and he left the company, but they didn't have a strong non-compete.
Mm-hmm.
So Satan started his own company,
Yeah.
and they've been warring ever since.
Yeah, pretty much.
It's basically
It was a hostile takeover.
It's basically how it sounds.
Yeah.
It's fucking retarded, man.
Yeah, it was ridiculous. So, after we talked about the devil, then we talked about the second coming and the millennium. This is where we kind of got a better understanding of what they think the afterlife is like. So, the basic structure is this. So, before Jesus' second coming and all that stuff, the spirit world is split up into two separate little divisions. There's spirit paradise and spirit prison. Now, this isn't the same thing as heaven and hell. This is like a temporary holding area. So basically what's going on is that, according to Joseph Smith, he had a vision where he visited the spirit world, and he was able to, like, see all this stuff. And this is during the same time when he met with all the prophets, and they gave him the structure for the Aaronic and Melchizedek orders.
It's Melchizedek.
Whatever.
Melchizedek.
So
Okay, go on.
When they gave him the structure for the Aaronic and Melchizedek orders,
You can't. It's Melchizedek.
Melchizedek.
It's not Mel's cheesy dick.
Yeah. When he gave them the structure for the Aaronic and Melchizedek priesthoods, basically, when you're in spirit paradise, you conduct all the same duties that you would, like, wherever your designation in the church happens to be. You basically keep doing all the same stuff, but with the added bonus of, like, basically teaching people who are in spirit prison about Mormonism. You're basically an unpaid teacher. Like, that's pretty much like you're a prison teacher, I guess, you know?
Great.
And in spirit prison, that's for people who didn't receive the Gospels, but their spirits still retain free agency. So you still have free will in prison. And the idea is, when you're in spirit prison, you're being taught about Mormonism, and you're receiving the Gospel and the ordinances and everything like that. And if on earth the LDS Church gives you, like, you know, your baptism and all that, you know how they baptize dead people, that's why. So if you receive your baptism on earth and you learn about the Gospel and you learn about, you know, LDS Mormon religion in spirit prison, then you can be moved up to spirit paradise.
Interestingly, that seems like a lot of people have this idea of purgatory that's very similar to that. It seems very similar.
Yeah.
The actual Catholic doctrine is something pretty different, but nobody actually knows. So this is what everybody thinks purgatory is like, the spirit prison.
Yeah.
You know.
So apparently if you're in spirit prison and you reject the gospel after, you know, hearing about it either in spirit prison or on earth, you basically go from spirit prison to hell, which is where you suffer basically until the second coming happens. Once the second coming happens, that's when people in spirit prison will have the opportunity to be transferred into the lowest levels of heaven, so long as they, you know, accept Jesus and all that stuff. And people in spirit paradise will also be transferred up into the different levels of heaven. Now, after the second coming, Jesus is going to destroy all the wicked people, which we found out only means apostates. So even if you, like, rape and eat babies, as long as you're not an apostate, you're good. You're not going to be cast
you
out.
could be the best person in the world.
Mm-hmm.
If you're an apostate.
Oh yeah, you're getting cast out. You're going to get destroyed. Basically, he sends all these wicked people into the outer darkness with the devil. So that's the only way you can go to, like, the same place as the devil, is if you're an apostate. At that point, he is going to judge all of the people currently in spirit paradise and spirit prison, and then place them within one of the three heavenly kingdoms, celestial, terrestrial, or telestial heaven. And those in hell, they have to actually wait for the second resurrection to be, you know, taken to telestial heaven. So it's kind of weird. It's like there's two resurrections, apparently. One at the front end of the millennium and then one at the back end,
Wait, do you get resurrected twice, or just different types of people get resurrected at different times?
I guess the only people who have to wait and suffer more are the people who are in hell at the time of Jesus' second coming.
Okay, I guess that makes sense.
They have to wait till the millennium's over, and then they can go. So after the second coming, Jesus appears, and then he ushers in the millennium. So what the millennium is, it's a 1,000-year period where there's no death, there's peace and love all the time, and the devil is actually bound, so there's no evil or temptation. He can't do anything anymore. Jesus becomes the king of earth and heaven, and he establishes a righteous government, and he reveals all the truths not yet known. But then towards the end of the millennium, the devil is going to somehow get loose, that wily devil, and he's going to amass an army and have one big final fight with Jesus and the Archangel Michael, who is also Adam. And, of course, he's going to lose and be cast out forever, and then Earth will be turned into a celestial heaven.
Oh, spoiler alert.
Spoilers,
Sorry.
guys. So, basically, the way that the three heavens are divvied up are the celestial kingdom is the best one, terrestrial is below that, and then telestial is the lowest. In celestial heaven, basically, that's where you get to become like God. Like, you get your own planet, and, you have God powers and all that stuff. And this is reserved for people who received the gospel, they believed in Jesus, they were baptized, they kept the commandments, they received the Holy Spirit, and they were married. So those are the requirements.
I wonder, do you get to pick your god powers?
I don't know.
Or is it just kind of like the whole package, like everybody has the omnis,
Yeah.
which don't make sense in this context.
Right.
But like, if I wanted to be Poseidon,
Could you have Poseidon powers?
could I do that?
Probably.
Or, Hades.
I don't see why not. I mean, fuck, since we're just making stuff up anyway. Sure, you can be whatever you want, Ryan.
Do you have to have a Satan, too?
Oh, I guess you do. You just have to create a Satan.
Can't you just not do that?
No,
Seems
Ryan.
like-
No, Ryan. No.
Seems like that would solve a lot of these
No,
issues.
Ryan. It's against the rules.
Okay.
Even though you're God and you establish those rules.
Ooh, also, this is specifically for men. Men can become gods, right?
It doesn't specifically say that, but I'm pretty sure that's implied.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, because I think there's certain things that Mormon men can do that Mormon women can't do, like become priests and whatever.
yeah, so this whole concept of you have to be married to get into the celestial kingdom, this kind of delves into a little bit of the controversy behind polygamy in Mormonism and why it's a religious tenet. I think we're going to get into that a little bit later, but just keep that in mind. The fact that you have to be married to get into celestial heaven is important. And that's where the concept of polygamy came into play for the Mormons. So below the celestial kingdom is the terrestrial kingdom. And this kingdom will only be visited by Jesus, but not by God. So you don't get to be God in this one. But you do get to see Jesus. He hangs out there. It's his crib.
He slums.
He slums. So this terrestrial kingdom is reserved for those who rejected the gospel in earth, but received it in spirit prison, or for those who received the gospel but were not valiant in upholding it or, I guess, spreading it around. So basically, Ryan, this is where we would be. We would be in Telestial Kingdom, I guess.
Huh.
Not bad, I guess. I mean, all things considered, it's not terrible.
Yeah.
Not a bad way to go. So below that is the Telestial Kingdom. And this will not be visited by God or Jesus. This will only be visited by the Holy Ghost.
He'll go in there and give you back rubs.
Yeah. He'll grope you. It'll be very awkward.
No, he'll go in and tingle your spine.
So this heaven is reserved for people who didn't receive the gospel or Jesus on earth or in the spirit prison. Basically, I guess the only way to get there would be like if you were in spirit prison and, you had already died and it's clear that the Mormons were right, but you were sitting there in your little, spiritual Sunday school and you were like, fuck this. And then you got sent to hell.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have the opportunity to still go to heaven after the millennium is over, but you could only get into telestial heaven. This is kind of interesting because it totally invalidates Pascal's wager, right?
True, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, Pascal's wager is that whole bit about, like, if the claims of religion are true, then you would want to believe it to maximize the payoff, because if it's not true, then, you don't lose anything. But if it is true and you don't believe, then you have everything to lose. So why not just believe, right? Well, according to this model, it doesn't really matter if you believe or not on Earth, as long as you go to the spirit prison and you're willing to accept all the truths while you're in spirit prison, you can still go to heaven. So it really doesn't matter. The only way that this is invalidated is if you are still alive during the second coming.
Yeah.
Because then you can still be judged and sent to hell and stuff. I guess even then, the only way is to like be an apostate, is to get cast out into the outer darkness. So worst case scenario, you go to hell for like 1,000 years and then it's over and you can go to heaven. So
it's a stupid solution to a stupid problem.
yeah, pretty much. Pretty much. After they explained all this to us, then we got into talking about whether or not the LDS theology allows for deathbed conversions. Basically, the answer was no. And the reason why is because they actually have a process of repentance. So this is kind of where the acts versus grace alone or faith alone getting you into heaven. You do need faith. However, the process of repentance has to happen before you're eligible to be able to go to heaven or whatever. So you must recognize your sins. You must feel sorrow for your sins. You must stop sinning. You must confess your sins. You must make restitution with those you've sinned against. You must forgive those who have sinned against you. And then you have to keep the commandments from then on.
Yeah, so I don't know how well this is adhered to in Mormon circles, but it certainly sounds better than, the rinse and repeat type Christians.
Yeah.
Like every Sunday they wash off the sins from the previous week and then they go back and do whatever, and they're just kind of shitty people. But, whatever they do is justified because they prayed for it and they're clean now. It seems like, at least theoretically, in Mormonism, they have to actually do something in the world to make up for it.
Definitely. It definitely seems to give them the position of, moral superiority when you compare it to the faith alone kind of doctrine where all you have to do is apologize to Jesus. But the one thing that strikes me is like, when you hear people arguing about like, oh, acts won't get you into heaven, it's only faith and only, believing in Jesus, it makes that position seem so much more fucked up by comparison, Like, I don't have to make restitution with people I wrong. I just have to apologize to Jesus and it's fine. Like, I don't want to have to fucking do stuff. Fuck that.
Yeah, and completely leave aside that whole parable of the goats and the lambs.
Right?
I forget which book that was.
I think it's Matthew.
Yeah, it's Matthew. Yeah. So basically, if you don't know that story, it's, there's goats on the left side and sheep on the right side, and they both believe in Jesus, but the goats didn't help out their fellow man, and he said that because you haven't done that to them, you haven't done it to me. And the opposite is true with the sheep. They did help their fellow man, so it's like, if they helped out their fellow man, then they helped out Jesus. And that was the difference between, being the lamb and being the goat, getting saved and getting not getting saved.
I mean, if you think about it, the position of like, oh, I just have to apologize to Jesus for all the things I do wrong and I'm still saved, that's pretty fucked up. Like, imagine you saw a mother parenting her child that way. Like you're sitting at the park and one kid, like let's say little Johnny, shoves little Tommy and he falls over and scrapes up his knee, right? And, little Tommy starts crying. So little Johnny's mom comes over and sees what's going on and sees little Tommy on the ground. He's got a big gash on his knee and he's crying. And little Johnny, is standing there and she's like, okay, what happened? And Johnny's like, well, you made fun of me. So I pushed him. And, she's like, okay, well, what do you have to say about that? And he, little Johnny turns over to little Tommy and he starts to apologize. And then his mom goes, whoa, hold on. What the fuck are you apologizing to him for? No, you apologize to Jesus, all right? He's the real victim here. I'm sorry, Jesus. That's right. Okay, now, little Tommy, do you have anything to say? What do you have to say to Jesus? Like, I think if anybody saw that actually happen, they'd be like, what the fuck is wrong with this lady? That's not what should be going on. But when we apply it to Jesus, oh, well, then it's okay. That's the way it's supposed to work, right?
One thing wrong with your story is that you're supposed to blame the victim, Michael.
Yeah.
So the victim's got to apologize.
Exactly. That's why I said she turns to little Tommy, who's on the ground crying with a gashed knee. She's like, do you have anything to say to Jesus?
I missed that.
Oh, God. Okay, let's move on. Then we had a discussion about faith, and they were talking about how the difference between like Mormon faith and other denominations of Christian, their faith is different because if you have faith and you demonstrate your faith in the Mormon church, you receive blessings. So there's kind of this testable claim they have where if you show faith, you receive these blessings in exchange. So you can test it. And they keep saying that, like, test us. See if we're wrong, you know? And they gave us the example of tithing. And it's kind of funny the way they talked about it. They were saying that if you tithe, then you are blessed with having everything you'll need to live. And one guy was talking about, like, he's like, yeah, so some people, we've heard of many, many accounts where people were trying to decide whether or not they should spend their money tithing or paying their bills. And there are just so many accounts of people tithing and instead of paying their bills, and then the money just magically appears from, all these seemingly unlikely circumstances, and all the bills are able to be paid on time. And then after he said that, one of the other missionaries was like, yeah, and I mean, sometimes you'll get the money to pay the bills, and sometimes you won't, but you'll be blessed in other ways.
Yeah.
I was like, wait a minute.
You still have the bills.
I was like, wait a minute. So are your bills going to get paid or not? Like, they keep moving the goalposts from like, oh yeah, if you do this, then this will happen. But sometimes it won't happen. Sometimes something different will happen.
Yeah, so,
like,
I mean, you still have to pay the bills. I mean, a way to make sure that you have the money to pay your bills is to, maybe not give away 10% of your income. Yeah. I love how like you'll get blessed in another way. Yeah. So like what if that one completely takes over the blessings like that you asked for?
So another thing that they talked about with, these blessings that they receive from their faith or demonstration of faith was they felt, one of the missionaries talked about feeling the confirmation of the word of wisdom from the Spirit after sustaining a really serious shoulder injury by feeling the fruits of the Spirit. He talked about how, I think he was like playing soccer or something. He was doing something physical. And he took a bad fall and he injured his shoulder. And he was saying like, yeah, I was on the ground. I was in a lot of pain, just so much pain. And everybody was gathering around and they were like, oh shit, looks serious. And he immediately demands a prayer, like right there. They're like, guys, can you pray over me real quick? And so they say a prayer. And, he was telling us how he liked to do marathons and like Spartan races and things like that where you need your body to be in top physical condition, and serious injuries can set you back a lot. So in the past, he had always been very careful not to like push himself too hard when he was doing things, not to, do more than his body was capable, because he didn't want to have injuries like that, because he was always afraid of, if I get injured too badly, I'm not going to be able to do any of this stuff anymore. So he said that after these people prayed over him, at first he was feeling this kind of anxiety, like, oh man, I'm not going to be able to do all this stuff that I really enjoy because the shoulder injury is going to be too serious, and I'm never going to have the same range of motion in my shoulder, and when I'm 40, I'm still going to have pain and stuff. And he said after the prayer that he felt comfort and like everything was going to be okay. And he had no feelings of nervousness, and he felt like he was at peace, and the pain was relatively gone. Yeah, or adrenaline, and the fact that, the word of wisdom that he was talking about was that rule where you basically don't pollute your body with like, drugs, alcohol, smoking, or caffeine or tea or anything like that. So maybe just the fact that he was healthy, like, yeah, I don't know. Like,
maybe, I think, Michael, it seems like maybe that could be like, in the Chamber of Secrets, Harry Potter, where he gets hit with a bludger and he breaks his arm. And the Defense Against the Dark Arts guy comes over and tries to cast a spell on him, removes his bone. It's the same concept.
It's kind of like that, yeah. According to the Gospel Principles, I read that some of the blessings from your demonstration of faith are, and I quote, gifts, wisdom, knowledge, miracles, healings, speaking in tongues, interpretations of tongues. And basically the whole list of the things you're supposed to receive as, I guess, a reward for showing faith, they're all like really, really vague. Mm-hmm. Like, you're going to receive knowledge. really? Like, I can't remember, like, a month going by where I have not accrued a vast amount of knowledge just living life, you know? Watching the news and being on the internet.
Can you think of an hour that you haven't gained knowledge?
Yeah,
I mean,
like,
that's
the thing.
That's just a factor of life.
Yeah, it's called living. Like, and you're gonna gain wisdom. You mean you're gonna, like, be exposed to different experiences in your life and learn from that? Shocker.
Wow.
It's all so fucking vague. But anyway. So at this point, I had conducted a prayer experiment because in our second meeting, they had told us if you pray to God in the form of yes or no questions, you will receive yes or no answers. And the parameters they set for me were, if you ask God a question, if the answer is yes, then you will feel the fruits of the Spirit. If the answer is no, then you won't feel anything at all, because the Spirit is not present, right? So basically what I did is I decided to pray about a question that I already knew the answer to. And the reason why I did this is because it doesn't do me any good to try to communicate with God if the answer I receive is something that I cannot understand or interpret,
Makes
right?
sense.
So it makes sense, yeah, to start with a question you know the answer to, so you'll be able to receive verification on whether or not it was responded to in the way that they promised. So I decided to ask God whether or not having free will was an important part in the heavenly plan. And of course, nothing fucking happened. So I was like, so is the answer no? Because that directly contradicts with Mormon doctrine.
Unless you were praying to Satan inadvertently. It could change things.
No, Ryan. I do my prayers to Satan before I go to bed, okay?
Okay. Right
after I eat babies. So
right, I mean, that's like everybody, but...
Yeah, at least I'll be atheist, right? So basically, I pointed this out to the missionaries, and I was like, so what happened? Like, you said that if I gave a yes or no question, I would be given a yes or no answer. And then the answer appeared to be no, even though I know intellectually the answer is yes. And one of the guys, he was like, you know, if you ask God a question and he knows you know the information, does he really have to tell you the answer? And I was like, no, you're missing the fucking point. That wasn't the point. Like,
yeah, so God receives your prayer and he's like, oh... Nice try, Michael.
Fucking spammers. God damn it. So then one of the guys actually saw what I was doing. He's like, oh, that's a really intelligent way to approach that. I've never thought about it that way. Then they basically like acknowledged that I had a sound structure for my experiment, and then they began a bunch of backpedaling and then moving the goalposts.
Yeah, it was great.
They each took a goalpost, picked it up, and then just started running as far back and in at angular directions to make the goalpost as small as possible. They were basically like, oh, you know, if these factors aren't present, then, you know, this must have happened and that. Like, they were just basically moving the goalposts so to make it seem like I did something wrong. Like, I fucked up somehow.
So I feel the Spirit has responded to me. If before I pray, I turn around twice, and then I throw some salt over my shoulder, and then I lay down, do 10 push-ups, get up, and start praying. That's when I feel the Spirit. If you didn't do that, then...
That's why.
That's why.
User
Yeah,
error,
that's
clearly.
why it didn't work.
So when they were doing all this backpedaling and trying to redefine all the things they had told us before and be like, no, that's not what we meant. This is what we meant. I remember thinking that this reminded me a lot of another prayer experiment I had seen on a show. I think it was on BBC. But apparently there's this guy out in the UK, and he's very popular. He's an atheist, and I think he is like a psychologist or something like that, and he has a TV show. In this segment of his show, he performs an experiment on the efficacy of prayer. And it's not like, you know, an official experiment. It's just kind of this fun little experiment where they take this woman, and, you know, he sits her down, and he tells her, okay, so here's what we're going to do. For the next month, we are going to have a team of actors follow you around, and they're going to make events happen in your life. And the purpose is that these actors are going to be trying to communicate a message to you, something that they think you need to know, but they're not allowed to say it directly to you. They have to communicate it through these events that they orchestrate. And he gave an example. He's like, okay, you see that woman over there? They were at a cafe. And he's like, you see that guy coming over here on a bike? He's going to get off his bike, and he's going to bump into that guy. That guy's going to spill coffee on himself. He's going to freak out, and then the next guy behind him is going to stand up out of his chair. The chair is going to fly back, hit the waitress who's bringing you your coffee, and she's going to spill it. And then he snaps his fingers, and then all the actors do the jobs they're supposed to do. The guy gets off the bike, he knocks over the guy's coffee. The guy freaks out. The guy sitting next to that guy gets up. The chair flies out, hits the waitress, spills the coffee. Fucking amazing, right? So then he tells this woman, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to give you a journal. And during this next month, you're going to be looking for these events that are going to be happening in your life. And in the journal, we want you to write down what you think the messages they're trying to communicate to you are and why you think that based on the events that happened. So she's like, okay. So a month passes, and she comes back, and she's got, the journal full of notes, and, they were asking her, what kind of messages do you think the actors were trying to communicate to you? Oh, well, I had this happen to me. I was on the subway, and this homeless man was staring at me, and I felt something, and I think this is what they were trying to communicate to me. And she just tells them all about these different things that she thinks the actors were trying to communicate to her by these, prearranged events happening in her life. Then the guy's like, that's interesting, but here's the thing. We didn't actually have a team of actors following you for a month. All the stuff that you thought you saw, you just, you invented something that wasn't there. We just primed you to see it.
That's great.
So it's kind of the same mechanism here, where basically all their backpedaling and everything, it came to the conclusion that if you're not primed to assume that prayer and all this stuff works, then, it's going to seem like, from my position, when I did this prayer experiment, I was like, nothing fucking happened. You said it was supposed to happen, it didn't happen. But to an individual who's already primed to look for the gifts of the Spirit or see their prayers answered or whatever, then it's a lot easier to convince those people, because then they don't have to do all this backpedaling, redefining, and mental gymnastics to make it fit.
Yeah.
And this brings us to the end of our meeting, where they gave us one final challenge. They told us to think about the concept of God that they had presented to us up until that point, and then they wanted us to answer the question, do you want that to be real? Now, clearly this muddies the waters, right off the bat.
Yeah.
It's not a question of whether or not it is real or not. They're asking, do you want that to be real? And it's clear what they're trying to do here.
So I have a last challenge for you guys. I want you guys to appeal to your emotions.
Yeah.
Surpass your reason.
Yeah, pretty much. That's what it is. Now, it was like one of those things where, first of all, they tried to do this in the other two meetings. We're like, yeah, that's not going to work on us. But one of the things I was thinking about, I was like, well, that kind of muddies the water, because you're trying to make the person go, well, of course I want that to be real. And really, in this version of theology where, even people who are non-believers have the chance to still make it to heaven, and, the only way you get tortured for eternity is if you're an apostate, if it's all true, then yeah, you would want that to be real over, Protestant Christianity, where if you don't believe, you just burn forever, and even if you're a good person, none of that fucking matters.
If you dance or you have sex,
if you eat shellfish,
that's how you go to heaven.
Yeah, so given the alternatives, of course you'd want this version to be real, but that doesn't matter. It matters more whether or not it actually is real, right?
So to answer their question, though, ask directly to you, what would you say?
Well, for me, that'd kind of be my answer, would be not even just for my own sake, but for the sake of everybody else. So let's just assume we take non-existence off the table. Nothing happens when you die. Let's just say that we can invalidate that option somehow. And what we're left with is basically these alternatives of the different religious claims about what happens in the afterlife. And the majority of those claims, have people being tortured for finite crimes for all of eternity. Even if you're a good person, the big crime you committed is not believing in that specific deity or whatever. This version of theology is at least a little bit softer than those other ones, where you have some ability to be like, hey, I didn't have that information available to me on earth. I was just using my critical thinking and reasoning skills to the best of my ability. And clearly I wasn't convinced, but at least now in the afterlife, when I know it's true, I'm able to, reconcile with new information and still get into heaven and not be tortured forever. So if the question is, would you want it to be real versus all the other doctrines? Well, yeah, just because I wouldn't be tortured, all the other good people who died, they wouldn't be tortured. It's a better version. But I mean, on a personal level, I don't really care, I guess. I mean, it's kind of an irrelevancy to me. I mean, because even if, let's say, God does exist, that really doesn't tell you much else about the afterlife. Like, these are independent claims that God exists, there's an afterlife, and then all the other details about said afterlife. Those are independent claims on their own. So even if you get one, because they told us to think about their version of God, so even if that's real, that doesn't necessarily mean all the other claims about the afterlife are real also. So it's kind of a, who gives a fuck?
Right. So when I was thinking about this, I kind of had a difficult time answering. It's kind of it can be a difficult question. Yeah. And I think you kind of swayed me in your direction. But, I was going through these thought processes like, I don't want there to be I don't want there to be a God because it's like, the celestial dictator.
Yeah, Hitchens, yeah.
I don't think I would want that. But then the way that you described it, that kind of makes sense. But then I had to think, like, if I want to have a skeptical mindset, then I would have to accept it if it were proven true. And yeah,
that's the thing.
That's my answer. I mean, if it were true, then I could maintain my skeptical attitude and still believe it.
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, same thing with gravity.
Yeah.
like I'm a skeptical person, but I believe gravity is real because it's demonstrable.
Yeah. I'm a skeptical person, but I believe the earth is flat.
Because it says so in the Bible.
Right. Okay.
Little boy at peace. What is this place? Beyond the stars. Open up your eyes. What are these things you're moving toward? Head so full of wonder. Worries in the past. Could it be that you are free at last? No! Little boy, you're going to hell! You said bad words for rocks in the buzz, and now this is your tale. You ain't going back to see Disneyland's hell! Little boy, it's time for you to pay! Hurting that bird and not going to church and staring at blurry day. Thought you were unbanned, instead you're in hell! Hell isn't good, hell isn't good.
So we got the next section of 23 minutes in hell now. So Michael, tell us what happened.
Okay, so before we get started, I just want everybody to understand what a citation is, all right? So according to Webster's Dictionary, a citation is the act of quoting a source, a reputable source, preferably. So if we go to the Purdue Owl University, the guys who construct the MLA format guidelines, they tell us that using MLA style properly makes it easier for readers to navigate and comprehend a text by providing familiar cues when referencing other sources or borrowed information. So abiding by MLA standards as a writer will allow you to provide your readers with cues you can use to follow your ideas more effectively and to locate information of interest to them. Allow readers to focus on your ideas by not distracting them with unfamiliar or complicated formatting. And finally, establish your credibility or ethos in the field by demonstrating an awareness of your audience and their needs as fellow researchers.
Fellow researchers.
So far, a lot of what he does is not done according to that. He just says stuff.
Yeah, maybe we should send him an email being like, "Hey, check out this website."
Just like there's like in the book all the red pen marks and everything. Like this is improperly used. like you would in middle school, like from your teacher. like a letter grade on. All right, you got a D at best. Like your citations need work.
All right, you got a D, maybe a C with a blowjob. So. All right, so what happened?
So this is the second part of the first chapter. Last time we read through the cell. This is the living dead. So this half of the chapter is only 4 pages long, but it is so fucking dense with citations. I only got through 2 pages.
Oh my god.
2 pages, and I was just like, this is going to be too much for, like this would be an episode all by itself if we just did all the citations. So we're only going to go through half of The Living Dead, and then we'll cover the other half another day. So to recap, so far, he appeared in a jail cell, and then there were some monsters, and then everything went dark. Couple other monsters walked into the cell. Then he had some angry monster gang rape.
Yeah, you got the reach around.
You got the reach around. And so he starts by saying, I pleaded for mercy, but they had none. Absolutely no mercy. They seemed incapable of it. No mercy existed in this place. Mercy is from God in heaven, footnote. So we have our first footnote in the statement.
Line.
So just so we can track whether or not he's doing good citation, the statement he cited is mercy is from God in heaven. So any citation he uses should basically support the idea that God in heaven is the source point for mercy, right?
Yeah,
that seems logical.
Of course.
So the first chapter note he has is Psalms 36:5. This is the psalm talking about the wickedness of inequity, basically. And he says, your mercy, O Lord, is in the heavens, ... Overall, that's okay, but I will say it was a little bit misused. It doesn't show that God in heaven is the source point of all mercy. He only talks about God's mercy specifically. The rest of that just rests on the assumptions made by Christian doctrine. You know, like he is the highest possible source of all things good. But you know what? For him, that's acceptable. I'll let that one slide.
Yeah, it's a decent citation by comparison.
Yeah, by comparison. The next one he did was Psalms 103:17. This is basically like just David giving God fellatio in word form. Like that's the whole psalm. He takes a section out of this and says, the mercy of the Lord is ... on those who fear him. So kind of the same thing as before. It's not really talking about mercy in general or making God as a source point. It's just talking about God's mercy specifically. But you know what? I think Bill's learning. He's getting better at it. He's getting the hang of this. So I'll let it slide. So that's one good chapter note, 2 good biblical citations so far. So let's see if he can keep his streak going.
Yeah.
Asking for mercy from such an evil only seemed to heighten their desire to torment me more. Well, yeah, see what I said last time. Torture porn. It's torture
Exactly.
porn.
Yeah, that's what they want. They get off on it.
Exactly. I was conscious of the fact that there was no fluid coming from my wounds. No blood, no water, no nothing. Footnote. So,
Already? God.
Already,
okay,
yeah.
So I haven't even seen these pages. Are they like half footnote?
Actually, they're only like little chapter notes. He provides like 3 pages at the end of the chapter with all the listing of all the notes.
God.
So you're just reading and you just see a bunch of little numbers everywhere.
Great.
So here we go. Let's do our next chapter note. And again, just to make sure whether or not he does a good citation, this should be supporting the fact that there is no blood or water in hell. So, okay.
I know where he's going with this.
So his first quote here is from Zechariah 9:11. 9/11 joke there. So Zechariah is just prophesying shit about how God's going to destroy a bunch of countries, and this is often regarded as one of the prophecies telling about the forthcoming Jewish Messiah that the Jews don't think Jesus fulfilled, but the Christians think Jesus did fulfill. So It says, I will set your prisoners free from the waterless pit. But again, remember, this is Old Testament, so this is one of the instances where the word Sheol is separate from the word hell. That's not the same thing. So even in the Hebrew context, they're talking about the waterless pit being Sheol, not hell. Now, the other thing I made a note of was the term waterless pit could also be a metaphor for desert, because there's a lot of metaphor and imagery in Zechariah's and really all of the prophecies and things like that. That's the reason a lot of these prophecies are used as proof, because they're like, oh, well, see, this prophecy predicted this and it happened. But if you read the prophecy, it's so fucking vague and general. And most of the time, it revolves largely around metaphor, so you can make it fit whatever you want, basically.
And a lot of people don't understand that convention of metaphors, so that's how we get people saying that there's going to be an actual 7-headed dragon with 10 horns.
It's gonna get crazy, you guys.
Uh-huh.
Okay, let's do the next one. Leviticus 17:11, and this is when Moses gathers together Aaron and his sons and the congregation into the tabernacle so he can perform blood magic to talk to God.
Yay.
This is when God was telling them about how they should go about doing their sacrifices, and it just says, "For the life of the flesh is in the blood," and he puts a little parentheses, "and there is no life in hell." The line of logic being, there's no life in hell, therefore there is no
Wait,
blood
was
in
that
hell.
an interjection by the author or
Yes, it was.
in a citation?
In a citation.
What a dickhole. You don't do that. That's not how it works.
Yeah, no, again, it's not a good citation if you need conjecture to back it up. Then
Yeah.
that's not a good citation.
What the
and
fuck?
it doesn't even say anything about what he was trying to prove.
Oh,
It's
God.
so bad.
Okay, if he doesn't talk about the rich man at Abraham's bosom asking...
That's the next one.
Okay.
That's the next one, yeah.
Okay, because if he
Yeah.
wasn't going there, I was going to be like, what the fuck are you... Have you even read this shit?
So the last quote is Luke 16:24, and this is one of Jesus's parables about Lazarus, the beggar, and the rich man. And this is when he was talking to the publicans and the sinners. And it says, "Send Lazarus that he may dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am tormented in this flame." And this is the rich man speaking about his experience in hell at the time.
Mm-hmm.
However, it doesn't necessarily say that there is no water in hell, because we've already established that hell has both complete darkness and fire, so it clearly doesn't abide by the laws of physics. So there's no reason it can't contain, like, completely covered in fire and also contain water at the same time, because magic.
Yeah, but in that story, isn't the rich man in a place called Abraham's bosom, which is more like not hell, but like sort of like our
Lazarus. Lazarus was in Abraham's bosom, and the rich man was in hell. Yeah.
Okay.
So he was like in hell watching Lazarus be coddled in
Right,
Abraham's
okay,
bosom, and was
okay.
like, man, I wish I got some of that.
All right, I remember.
Yeah. Okay, so let's keep on trucking. "I was extremely nauseous from the terrible foul stench coming from these creatures. It was by far the most putrid smell I have ever encountered." Footnote.
God fucking damn it. Does he have a footnote after every fucking sentence?
Just about on this page. Like, there's at least one per paragraph.
Oh
At
my
least
God.
one. So that's gonna be an exciting thing. I told you this is really dense. Next footnote, Mark 9:25. And this is another verse from when Jesus was getting mad at his disciples because they couldn't exorcise a demon from that child. So he was like, "You guys suck," and then he did it himself. We've already quoted this section before, so I'm curious what other stuff he pulled out of it.
Yeah.
And he says, in parentheses, "Jesus rebuked the foul spirit." And that's it. In context, this verse is not probably talking about what the demon smelled like. It probably has some more to do with...
It's just
like,
derogatory.
Yeah, it's a derogatory term for an unclean spirit or an evil demonic presence. It has nothing to do with what it smells like. And I mean, if it's possessing somebody, how do you know what the demon smells like? All you know is what the person who has the demon inside him smells like. That doesn't even make sense. So,
Oh, yeah, that reminds me of those crazy right-wing preachers that say that I forget, there was this one guy who said that he got close to Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama and they smelled foul. Because they were demon infested.
you know what I think it is? I think, like some people who are exorcists or have been in, like exorcisms or witnessed it or whatever, they say that there's always like a smell of sulfur, and that's one of the indicators that someone is possessed. It might be
yes.
something like that. But personally, I thought it was like if you read the verse, like right before that, or a couple of verses before that, this child comes forward and he's possessed and Jesus is thinking about what to do. And then all of a sudden, like a group of people start appearing and then he starts like shouting stuff at it, like that he starts rebuking the foul spirits. I think it was just showmanship. I think he
Yeah.
wanted to put on a show for the crowd, you know?
Yeah.
It's not quite as, because I mean, if theoretically he could have just been like snap his fingers and the kids exercise. That's all I would have taken. He's God,
Well,
right?
yeah, maybe
But
he
no,
was.
he was like, I got to put on a show.
Maybe he was like demonstrating to teach the people how to do it, because we can't just snap our hands and the demon is gone. We have to
So you have to
go to
rebuke.
therapists and get medication.
So let's keep working through the next section. Oh, he actually goes into detail about what this smelled like. He said
Great.
the beast smelled like an open sewer, rotten meat, spoiled eggs, sour milk, dead rotting animal flesh, sulfur, and basically you'd have to magnify that 1,000 times and you might come close. And he says this is not an exaggeration.
It's hyperbole.
That's an exaggeration.
Oh my
Like,
God.
and magnify this 1,000 times, talking about the smell. If you magnified the smell 1,000 times, you might come close. That's called hyperbole. Like, that's a textbook example of hyperbole.
I don't know how big he is on textbook.
Yeah, me neither. So he said that the odor was extremely toxic, and that alone should have killed me. I don't think I've ever smelled something so bad that people die from it.
Well, okay, so there is this one chemical compound that I heard about. It's like so foul smelling that like one time somebody spilled a drop and it ended up like basically having to evacuate an entire city block.
Oh shit!
So
That's
I mean,
crazy.
I guess some shit
Okay.
can get pretty bad.
Okay,
I think
okay.
it was the same compound as like skunks use in their stench, but it was like concentrated.
Okay, fair enough. I guess it's possible then. All right, let's keep moving. He didn't give a footnote for that, so
What?
we just gave a better citation for something he said than he has so far. Like, we just did a better job citing.
Okay, so wait a second. Are all of his citations from the Bible?
There is one in here he doesn't cite from the Bible, and the last time, remember, he cited that that case study of the exorcism. So they're not
Oh, yeah,
all
okay.
biblical citations, but the vast majority of them are biblical citations.
Great.
Yeah. So he says, instinctively, I just knew some of the things I experienced were 1,000 times worse than would be possible on the Earth's surface. Things such as odors mentioned, the strength of demons, loudness of screams, the dryness, and the loneliness felt. So again, just some wild fucking conjecture, and he chalks it up to instinct.
Yeah, well, at least, okay, so this was his personal interpretation of how he felt, and he didn't provide a citation, so that's good.
Yeah, I guess he's learning about, when it's appropriate to use a citation.
Nah.
It's a steep learning curve. It's gonna take him a while. And this is actually good. I made a note of this at the top of the page. He went an entire page with no citations or verses from the Bible. Went an entire page without doing it.
That's
I was
odd.
so proud of him. Yeah, I was
he-
proud of him.
Did he forget? Like, I wonder if he was like adding the citations after the fact, and he just skipped a page.
It was stuck together.
Yeah.
It's like, oh fuck, I forgot about that one. Oh, they already published it. So he says, I couldn't see, but I remembered the direction of the door. I finally made it to the door and crawled out of the cell. Apparently the creatures allowed me to crawl out without stopping me. I desperately wanted to run. All I could think of was to get up onto my feet. However, every move to get up took great effort. I remember wondering, why is this so difficult? I was finally able to stand. Although I was now outside the cell, I could not run, and fear continued to bind itself around me as a snake constructed its prey. Untold multitude of people crying out in torment. It was absolutely deafening. He kind of relates this to his own personal life when he saw a television special where there was a reporter who spent the night in a prison just to experience prison life. The reporter talked about the crying, moaning, and yelling all night long, and he said it never stopped and he couldn't sleep because of all the noise. And he says the place where I stood now was far, far worse. So I guess he's been to prison before?
Yeah,
Compare the two
he's got
experiences?
the whole Jim Baker experience.
Okay, so just keep in mind how much plot development we've gotten so far.
Yeah, but okay, so everything that you just read is like the same shit that he would have cited in the last page. So I really think that he has like a citation quota that he just met in the first page.
Well, he makes up for it in the rest of the pages, so, so
Great.
I don't know how he divvies up that quota, but keep in mind from the beginning, he's been just hammering us with citations and verses. So all that's happened so far is that he appeared in hell, he got gang raped by angry monsters, and he managed to crawl his way out. That's pretty much.
And that's it.
That's it. That's all that's happened. Oh, and he stood up. He managed to stand up. That's how much plot development we've gotten so far. And he's about to hit us with more citations. So there we go. He was standing in the middle of all this noise, and he finally began to think, I'm in hell. This is a real place. I'm actually here. I frantically tried to understand, but it was just so inconceivable. Not me. I'm a good person, I thought. The fear was so intense I couldn't bear it, but again, I couldn't die, footnote. Let's see what he gave us for this. The sentence he cited was, the fear was so intense I couldn't bear it, but again, I couldn't die. So I guess we're looking for citations of the fact that there's no death in hell or something like that.
I guess so. But so is he saying in this part right here that he had this scripture in mind when he was thinking that?
Not necessarily. He didn't say that necessarily. He was just freaking out, going, "Oh, I'm in hell. Why am I here? I thought I was a good person." Ah.
Okay.
So, 2 Thessalonians 1:9. And this is when Paul was talking about kind of some of the second coming imagery here.
Mm-hmm.
And it says, "These shall be punished with everlasting destruction." I don't see how that okay. So first of all,
Boo.
So first of all, 2 Thessalonians is largely considered to be a forgery by many biblical scholars, meaning it wasn't a part of the original manuscripts, and it was almost definitely not written by Paul. So this is somebody else.
But it's still
not
in
Paul.
the Bible.
Still
so
in the Bible, yeah. But this verse kind of fits what he's saying a little bit. Like everlasting destruction, I guess that means you don't ever get to die. You just constantly are being destroyed.
I guess so. I mean, sounds kinky. It's not really my thing, but
I think it's like, Prometheus's punishment, where he was being eaten alive by a bird, and then when the morning came, he just regrow everything and then get eaten again the next day. I think it's like that.
yeah, or maybe like Sisyphus.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Or Atlas.
Atlas. Poor Atlas. So the next one is Proverbs 10:24. This is basically an entire chapter, or an entire proverb, just contrasting the righteous man from a wicked man. Every verse is like, a wicked man does this, but a righteous man does this, for like the entire freaking proverb. It's ridiculous. So it says, the fear of the wicked will come upon him. And I think he's talking about the fear was so intense. I think that's the part of the statement he's trying to cite right here. And it's sort of unclear what it means in the proverb, because it seems like it's saying God will strike fear into the wicked man, but it has nothing to do with the fact that whether or not he's in hell, or if it was Satan who's doing it, or anything like that. Again, this is Old Testament, so they wouldn't have had a concept of hell, so they definitely weren't talking about this in the context of being in hell. But this does kind of set a weird precedent for maybe God's a dick? I don't know. I think he does this a couple of times actually coming up, so we'll get a little bit more in depth into this. So let's keep moving. I did not know how I arrived there. The fact I knew God was kept from my mind. This was explained to me later by the Lord himself. In retrospect, I know that there are several scriptures indicating that God does sometimes hide things from the mind of men. So I kind of made a note. I was like, so wait, is this God doing this, or is this the devil? Like, is God being a dick? Like, did he send you to hell and then he was like fucking with you while you're in hell? Like, what a douche.
Yeah, maybe it wasn't the real hell. It was just like a simulation of hell. Because he was talking about going there and then going back and telling people about it and shit like that. And that was supposedly God's idea, right? So maybe this is just like a training simulation.
I guess. So he actually included a footnote here, so maybe he goes into a little more detail. So he says that, of course, God can do anything, but he'll provide scriptural citations for it anyway. So these citations are for the fact that God can or is capable of keeping things from the mind of men. Luke 18:34, ... This saying was hidden from them, And Bill actually acknowledges the context. I'm proud of him. He says that this was when Jesus is telling his disciples about being crucified and dying, which when you read through some of the canonical Gospels, there's a few of them where he actually tells them, hey guys, I'm going to be crucified. And either they don't understand or I guess they forget or something, or God makes them forget. Like, it's kind of weird, but he tells them and then they're still surprised later. So I guess that's what he's going after.
The crucifixion, the reason why when Jesus is explicit about it and the disciples don't believe, it's because Jesus is subverting their expectations of what the Messiah is supposed to be. Mm-hmm. So it's just a literary interpretation of that.
Well, yeah, no, it's not necessarily that they don't believe him. It's like for example, in Luke, he like explains it to them, and then they just like forget. Like it was like almost erased from their mind, it seems like, because they didn't have any knowledge of those events, even though they were told about them. So even if they didn't believe Jesus, like, whatever, Jesus, you're pulling my leg, you know?
Nah, he's
fucking with us.
Jesus, he's the water to wine guy, from the party.
What a crazy guy.
That Jesus.
But this was more like Jesus was like, all right, so I'm going to be crucified and then going to rise up after 3 days. And, the crucifixion's going to suck balls. Like, it's going to be fucking horrible. But after that, I'll be God. So, oh, shit. I wasn't supposed to tell you that. Hold on. Let me get my little Men in Black flashy thingy.
Yes.
So I think that's kind of what he's going after here. So, yeah, he mentions the context. So I'm proud of him for that. But again, this kind of sets a precedent for God being a dick. Because if God can fuck with people's minds and their memories, then does that mean that once he sends them to hell, he's just like, oh, I'm not done yet. I'm going to fuck with your brain while you're down there to make it worse.
Yeah, he's vindictive when you go to hell.
What a dick.
Yeah, it's not the separation that some modern Christians talk about, like the eternal darkness of separation from God. It's just like he pops in every once in a while to just like give you a wedgie.
See, some of the colloquial understanding is like that's Satan doing all that, but no, he's like, nope, it was God. God did that. So, next one he does is Daniel 4:34. So this is about King Nebuchadnezzar. Mm-hmm. And he doesn't even give us the full verse. It just says, ... my understanding returned to me. And he acknowledges the context, and he says this is after King Nebuchadnezzar lost his sanity because of sin and lived like an animal in the fields for a time. And in context, if you actually read that entire chapter, or you read the story of Nebuchadnezzar and Daniel, it didn't seem to mean that knowledge returned to him, but rather like sanity, Yeah. Like, it's not like knowledge was taken from him, like in this example. This was like he had a mental breakdown.
Mm-hmm. He went to go live as John did in the Gospels. John the Baptist was just crazy all the time, but he was crazy for a little bit.
Just a little bit. He had one episode.
Mm-hmm.
But the other thing is that this chapter doesn't say specifically that it was God that did that to him. Like God took his understanding or took his sanity away and then gave it back. It really just seems like he had a psychological episode. Mm-hmm. And then when the psychological episode passed, he's like, oh, God saved me. But either way, this didn't happen in hell. So it's irrelevant.
Mm-hmm.
Bad, Bill. Bad. Bad. That's not how you cite shit. Let's go to the next section. We're almost done. We're about halfway there. As I stood outside the cell, I actually felt the darkness. Exodus 10:21 speaks of the darkness which may even be felt. This is basically a quote from when God was being a dick and hardened Pharaoh's heart so he couldn't comply with Moses' requests, so that God could keep punishing him by inflicting the 8th and 9th plagues, and of course the 9th plague was the 3 days of darkness. So that's what it was talking about, a darkness which may even be felt. But again, this doesn't take place in hell. This takes place in Egypt, which maybe they're pretty close.
Yeah, well, if God is omnipresent, then he can do shit anywhere. That's what
I mean, that's whatever. It goes on to say, it was not like the darkness on earth. I was once in a coal mine of Arizona, and it was completely void of light. I couldn't see anything, yet it was nothing like the darkness in hell. Footnote to
SpongeBob when he goes down into the canyon and he's like, this is advanced darkness.
So the first one is Psalms 88:6. David is telling God about his fear of ending up in Sheol, because remember, this is Old Testament.
Mm-hmm.
You have laid me in the lowest pit, in darkness in the depths. And the other one he did was Psalms 49:19. And this is David proselytizing onto everyone who's reading the psalm, I guess. He should go to the generation of his fathers, and they shall never see light. And for both of these, they have the same issue. Like, how many times is he going to mistake Sheol for hell? Like, they're not the same fucking thing.
Okay, so we know, just like going forward, that he is using a Christian interpretation or a superimposition of hell onto the idea of Sheol when he's reading the Old Testament. So that's a common, horrible, shitty thing that Christians do when they're talking about the Bible, which, you know, when you read the Bible as actual like ancient text and shit like that, it's actually pretty good, but I just hate when people talk about it like this.
Yeah, and it doesn't make the citations valid. Just because, like, you know, he was like, oh, this is how I read it. Well, then you're reading it wrong, dumbass. And then he says, it was as though the darkness had its own power, a power that consumed me, footnote. One sentence away, the very next sentence, he had to put 2 footnotes back to back, sentence to sentence. Let's see what he put in here. This one's a dense one, so this will be fun. Luke 22:53. This is when, you know, Jesus went to pray to God, and then he came down and had that, like, strangely sexually charged homoerotic moment with Judas, and he was taken away to be tried. It was, like, right then. When I was with you day in the temple, you did not try to seize me, but this is your hour, the power of darkness. That's it. And it didn't even happen in hell, nor is it a direct reference to hell. It's just conjecture at this point. Really.
It's when he did the global search and he found the word darkness.
The Control F. Darkness search. So the next one is 2 Peter 2:17. These are wells without water, clouds carried by a tempest, for whom is reserved the blackness of darkness forever. That was weirdly phrased. So this is kind of an interesting thing. I'll go to read the next quote because they're actually related. The next one is Jude 1:13. For whom is reserved the blackness of darkness forever. Now notice the phrasing of those 2 quotes are exactly the same.
Yeah.
So this shows a fundamental lack of research, because even if you did a cursory Google search, you could find out this information. So basically, 2 Peter is another book of the Bible that's considered to be a forgery. It was definitely not written by Peter as far as biblical scholars are concerned.
It's a pseudepigraphy, which means that it was somebody writing as if they were that person.
Yes. Now, one of the reasons they think this is because most of the passages from the book of 2 Peter are taken from the letter of Jude, which was written much, much later in about 80 to 100 CE. He actually used 2 verses from both of those, 2 Peter 2:17 and 1 Jude 13, that have identical phrasing, like almost the same exact sentence, although Jude's talking about something a little different, but the same phrasing, for whom is reserved the blackness of darkness forever. Mostly because 2 Peter took from 1 Jude 13 to actually have that phrase. That's where it came from. But he quotes both of them.
I believe that's called circular attribution, I think, yeah.
But I mean, just the fact that he cited both of these verses is extremely sloppy and unnecessary. And neither of them really do anything to support the point that he was trying to make. His statement was, it was as though the darkness had its own power, a power that consumed me. So like powerful darkness or unearthly darkness, it doesn't do anything to support that point, really. It's extremely sloppy.
I mean, there's plenty of other passages in the Bible that could have supported that much better.
It doesn't take place in hell, but it might be referencing hell. But again, you could have used one of those verses. You didn't need both. And the last one is Proverbs 20:20. ... His lamp will be put out in deep darkness. And in context, this is talking about sin and how people should conduct themselves and things like that. But this verse seems to be saying that people who disrespect their parents should be thrown out of the house. Because that's what the rest of the verse, the ... part that he conveniently left out, it was talking about people who curse their parents. His lamp will be put out in deep darkness. So it sounds like they should be kicked out of the house, not sent to hell. So, yeah, not really a good cite text on Bell's part.
Yeah, you're definitely overlooking the fact that these footnotes were not meant to be looked at.
Probably not. So he says the darkness was not simply the absence of light, it had a distinctive evil presence, a feeling of death, a penetrating evil.
I need me some penetrating evil.
Giggity, giggity.
Yeah.
I looked off to my right and could faintly see flames from afar of a dimly lit skyline. So, okay, I'll keep reading, but just keep in mind that he sees fire and a skyline. Okay, just keep that in mind. I knew the flames were coming from a large pit, a gigantic raging inferno approximately 1 mile in diameter and about 10 miles away.
Again, did he bring a fucking measuring stick?
Yeah, like, how did he know that?
He's so precise in his bullshit.
This was one of the many things I simply knew. My senses were keener, footnote. This one is actually, the first one is not a biblical citation. The other one is. But he provides one that's not. It is from a book called 1 Minute After You Die by Erwin Lutzer. And I did a little bit of cursory study on Erwin Lutzer. The Moody Church is where he's a pastor. Did a little bit of research on his background. Apparently, he is pretty well qualified in terms of theology, and he's got a doctorate, some master's. He went to Texas Theological Seminary, Winnipeg Bible College, Latoya University, and Simon Greenleaf School of Law. So, I mean, he's not a dumb guy. He also has a radio show. I think it's called Songs in the Night, and it's been on since like 1940s or so. He's also written a shit ton of books covering all kinds of different stuff. A few of the titles were like Rescuing the Gospels and When a Nation Forgets God. And, you know, you can kind of tell what kind of books he's writing, right? So he takes a quote from his book, 1 Minute After You Die. In the book, it says that those in Sheol have a heightened perception and a better understanding. That's the quote from the book. But, you know, obviously this guy is more scholarly because he actually identified the fact that it was Sheol and not hell. So that's good. I don't know how he reconciles those two things, but I don't necessarily see how this helps Bill's point. His ability, like keener senses, I guess, a heightened perception, maybe, a better understanding. What does that even mean?
Hey, maybe his brain became superpowered.
Superpowers. So you get superpowers when you go to hell. That's pretty dope.
Yeah. Yeah, you become like Spawn.
Right? That's what it is. We all get to be Spawn. So then he goes on with a Bible quote. Luke 16:23, and keep in mind we've already quoted Luke 16:24, I think was the last one from a couple of citations ago. It's the same story of Lazarus and the rich man. Yeah, it was Luke 16:24. So we've already looked at Luke 16:24. Now he wants us to look at Luke 16:23. So it's not like he's rehashing old stuff. No, that's not what he's doing.
Well, there's only so much room in the Bible to fit these citations.
I guess. We're going to run out of Bible. That's what's going to happen. We're going to run out of Bible.
Oh, no.
Again, Bill acknowledges the context, and he says, this verse infers heightened perception when it speaks of the rich man in hell who saw Abraham from afar and Lazarus in his bosom. And I was like, hey, good job, Bill. You actually recognize the context. You're getting better at that. I'm proud of you. You're learning.
No, he's not.
Anyway.
No, he's not.
And then he goes on to say that being a great distance away, how could he recognize Lazarus? Or how could he recognize Abraham, whom he may not have ever known? So I was like, okay, so Bill, how do you understand the distance between heaven and hell? Because if they're in alternate dimensions, how could we possibly know anything about the physics of the proximity between those two things? Like, well, how do you know they're not, like, dimensions kind of stacked on each other, you know? Like, you enter one dimension, but it's parallel, but it's kind of, like, on top of another dimension. You just can't access that other dimension. Because if that's the case, they could have been standing right fucking next to each other in terms of the dimensions. And then in terms of how he could infer who Abraham was, well, you could go based on an understanding of the demographics, which the rich man would have had first-hand knowledge of, and of the time period and the region, and as well as the description of Israelite beauty described in the Songs of Solomon, chapter 5, verses 10 through 16. Or maybe he was wearing a name tag. You know, maybe he had like Abraham right there on his
Wasn't
shirt.
he like 900 years old too?
Yeah, he was an old guy. I remember that. Yeah,
I mean, there's
maybe
not a
he
lot
knew
of
him.
people
Yeah.
who there's not a lot of people who it could be. There's only it's you know, Melchizedek, Abraham, and Pat Robertson. That's basically it.
That's it.
You know?
That's all it could be.
You got 3 options.
So yeah, he just pretty much follows this up with wild fucking conjecture. So let's keep going. The flames were intense, but the darkness seemed to swallow up the light. Footnote. He's getting really liberal with these
God.
footnotes.
This is like 10% story, 40% footnote.
Footnotes, yes. So it's from Job 10:22. So some conversation that Bill used from a citation last time, it's the same one where Job is talking to the 4 people and he's like, I don't know why God's punishing me. I thought I was cool with God and he's being a dick.
Because you're secretly a bad person.
And it says, ... a land as dark as darkness itself, as the shadow of death, without any order, where even the light is like darkness. And again, this is talking about the way that physics does not apply, where fire and darkness are in the same place. So apparently there's biblical citation for that. He's basically talking about, how he's afraid of entering Sheol without understanding why God is displeased with him. Verses 20 through 22 kind of outline a key difference between Sheol and Hell that Bill conveniently ignores. So this kind of has the same problem that the majority of all his other Old Testament quotes have, is that he ignores the difference. So that's pretty much it for that one. Let's just keep going. The skyline was barely visible. The darkness was somewhat like a black hole. Okay, so he doesn't seem to understand how black holes work, and which is weird because he gives a basic understanding. He says black holes are, places where pull of gravity is so strong that light cannot escape, and it's pulled in and all that stuff. So he seems to understand the gist of it. And then he says the darkness in Hell was like that. It was so dark that it seemed to hinder any light from traveling. Now, remember when I told you to remember the fact that he could see light from afar and there was a skyline and everything? If that's possible, then it's nothing like a fucking black hole, because he just doesn't understand how eyesight
Michael,
works.
It's a metaphor. This is just literary embellishment.
This is a first-hand account of a personal experience. There shouldn't be any metaphor here.
Well, personal experience can be expressed through metaphor.
Yeah, but that's not what he's doing, though. In the beginning of the book, he's like, this is all literally true. This happened to me.
That's right.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So then it goes on to, the only visible area was that which the flames expose. The ground was all rock, barren and desolate. There was not one green thing, not one living thing, not one blade of grass, not one leaf on the ground. It was just a complete wasteland. Footnote. Okay, so this citation is from Isaiah 59:10, and this is again more prophecies. It says, we are as dead men in desolate places. So basically what he's trying to prove is that hell is a lot like a desert, and I think he zeroed in on the phrase desolate places. However, the word desolate means a place deserted of people and in a state of bleak, dismal emptiness. It doesn't necessarily have to do with anything like a desert or a wasteland. But again, remember that these verses are written largely in metaphor, so it's also not probably meant to be taken literally. But again, this is about Sheol, not hell.
Right.
So, yeah, way to fuck that up. And then he says in the text, in Ezekiel 26:20, we read, then I will bring you down with those who descend into the pit, ... I will make you dwell in the lowest part of the earth, in places desolate from iniquity, and those who go down into the pit. If you take it in the context of what's written in the Bible, this is more prophecies written in the book of Ezekiel. And basically, again, it's talking about Sheol, and, it's talking about the lowest part of the earth. That's, if you look in firmament theory, that is Sheol, not hell. Which a lot of people nowadays, once we discovered more about plate tectonics and we were able to tell what the earth was comprised of, kind of get a cross-section of it, a lot of the apologists were like, oh no, heaven and hell are in separate dimensions. So this wouldn't be talking about hell anyway, according to most prominent apologists. It doesn't really support his point about hell and stuff. And finally he says, but the place I saw was barren, nothing, like a desert. So that's where we will stop today. That is halfway through The Living Dead. Although there is one quote I want to share with you because I thought it was funny. And in the book, there's text and then there's little quotes kind of scattered in, and the text is written around the quote kind of deal. And it's from Edward Donnelly. And it says, the reality of hell is so far beyond our experience that language cannot adequately describe it. Which basically makes this entire book pointless.
Yeah, it's kind of like what Ibn Alexander said about heaven, his experience with heaven. It's like, I'm starting to see a lot of similarities in these books. It seems like the authors have similar motivations and very similar shticks but
I thought it was kind of funny, but like by including that quote, it's almost like he's admitting that this is bullshit. Like it's nothing like my experience, because my experience is beyond, what language is capable of describing. So I thought that was funny.
That's pretty great.
But yeah, so after I did all this reading, I decided to start a scoreboard.
Yeah.
So this is our current running scoreboard. I have made it through approximately 14 pages of novel so far. And in those 14 pages, we have a total number of biblical citations at 52 citations. That's how many he's used so far. So then I categorized how many he used properly and how many he used improperly. And I just want to say, like, I was really generous. Mm-hmm. Like, I was going based on, like, a 7th grade standard. Like, if I turned this book into a 7th grade literature teacher, what would she deem is used appropriately and inappropriately in terms of citations? Do you want to hear the properly used citations or improperly used
let's
first?
Let's go properly.
Okay, so the number of properly used biblical citations is 10. 10 out of 52, which is 19%.
Great. He's on a roll.
And the number of improperly used citations is 42. That's 81%.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
So that's the running scoreboard right now.
Yeah, so he's passing?
I guess.
He has a B in failing?
In failing, yeah. He's so bad at failing, he's doing a good job. So I kind of want to see what his success rate and fail rate is at the end of this book.
Yeah.
So every time we do a reading from now on, I'm going to update the scoreboard so you guys can play along at home. So we're going to see how bad this gets. But
Sounds good.
Next time we'll be talking about another reading from Proof of Heaven.
Hey, maybe he gets a reach around from an angel.
Let's get back to the show. So to close up, I guess, we'll give you a little bit more of our research on polygamy, because obviously that's kind of a hot issue surrounding Mormonism and the fact that they're like, oh, we don't do that, but they totally do. Some of the controversy surrounding polygamy towards like the early days of the church, where Joseph Smith was the first one to really kind of enact it, because it was he's the one who gave the say-so to say, oh yeah, it's cool, you can do that. I heard there was some, like, I researched and I found that there was some like controversy surrounding Brigham Young and when he did it, but what I found about Joseph Smith was much more atrocious, the way he approached it. Joseph Smith had, I think it was like some 30 to 38 wives in his lifetime. But it was really fucked up because there are numerous stories of him marrying women who are already married. There are numerous stories of him like marrying a woman, fucking her, and then just like not doing shit for her. He didn't give her money, he didn't support her. He hid her away from the public eye. She had to be like under wraps. Like, it was ridiculous. He was like the ultimate deadbeat husband.
What a douchebag.
So the other thing he did was I remember one specific story. This is pretty fucked up. So he goes to one of his male parishioners and he tells him, I want to marry your wife. And of course, that's a pretty fucking, that's a pretty radical thing. That's like if the Pope went up to a Catholic parishioner and said, I want to marry your wife. Well, obviously the Catholic parishioner doesn't want to say no.
Yeah.
So the guy agonizes over it and he just fucking is trying to come to terms with whether or not he should allow this to happen. And he talks to his wife about it and finally they agree. So they go to Joseph Smith and they tell him, okay, you can marry my wife. And he goes, no, that was just a test. I was just testing you. I really want to marry your 14-year-old daughter.
Oh, no.
So they agree, and he marries the 14-year-old daughter. But the way it happens is so fucked up. So he says, I want to marry your 14-year-old daughter, right? And the 14-year-old daughter's like, gross, fuck no. And then he goes, oh, but you want your family to be saved in the afterlife, right?
Oh.
I mean, you want them to receive blessings, don't you? And I mean, man, I'm getting us some messages from God right now through my seer stones, and he's telling me that you should really reconsider if you want those blessings. Like, he basically extorted her through, like, telling her that her family wasn't going to be saved in the afterlife or receive blessings if he didn't get married.
Oh my God, that is despicable.
And she was like, oh, fuck. And the way she said it, there was an account where she was talking to a friend, I think in like a letter, or maybe it was written in a journal, I can't remember. But she basically said like, the way it was proposed to her, it would be like only on paper. Like, you know, they would be married, but it was more of like, you know, like a status thing. She wouldn't have to perform the wifely duties of actually, you know, fucking him. But he basically lied to her, because then he did. He basically raped her. Yeah. So, and then after that, of course, he never saw her again, really. Like, she had to be hidden away from the public eye. He didn't give her any child support. He didn't help her in any way whatsoever. But another thing he did, I can't decide if that's the worst thing he did or if this is the worst thing he did. He was known on multiple occasions to send his male parishioners out on mission trips to different parts of the colonial states. And when they were away on mission trips, he would marry their wives while they were gone.
No, he was a fucking Jody.
He was a Jody.
Oh.
And he wouldn't tell them. He wouldn't tell them about it. What a piece of shit.
Oh, God, I hate this guy even more now. I'm glad he got shot.
What a piece of shit.
God, fucking cult leader David Koresh type guy.
Yeah, I mean, he was fucking despicable. This is just a piece of human garbage.
God, I mean, on top of everything else, you have to add the pedophile rape Jodiness. Ugh, gross.
Right? Fuck this guy.
All right. Anything else on that, Michael?
That's all I was able to find, but God, I mean, if you
sure
do some digging,
more.
I'm sure there's more, yeah.
God, okay, so I wanted to close this out with some tips on handling Mormon missionaries, and this is from the Institute of Catholic Culture. I kind of modified it to tailor it towards humanism. So, first tip is to let them talk without interrupting. Be respectful. And that's kind of like if you start interrupting them and start asking them questions right away, that's kind of going to turn them off. If you're trying to deconvert them or start a deconversion process, it's not good to start in a confrontational way. The second option is pray. I don't recommend that, but they did, so. 3, after a while, start asking about contradictions and strange things that you've heard about Mormonism. You won't get them to leave the faith immediately, but it's about planting a seed of doubt or letting doubting Mormons know that there's a better way. For Mormons don't read any literature that you give them, so it's not a useful thing to do, and they're handled very closely by their mission. And 5 is don't attack Joseph Smith or the books directly to them, because they have a history of persecution, and it'll just shut you off.
Okay, so last thing before we go. We also did some research and we found that the Mormon Church has connections to Freemasonry. And some of them are kind of obvious, like if you go to the Mormon temples and stuff, apparently there's a lot of Mason iconography and architecture there. But more importantly, the temple ceremony has a lot of connections to Freemasonry. So apparently, in order to go to heaven, one of the ordinances you have to receive is the endowment ceremony. And the endowment ceremony was apparently taken directly from the Masons. Like, it's the same exact ceremony. And this is because Joseph Smith, as well as a couple of other big players in the church, when it was founded, they were actually Masons themselves. And it's funny because the endowment ceremony was added as a Mormon practice just a few weeks after Joseph Smith went through the ceremony himself with the Masons. So,
so suspicious. So where do the Mormons fit into the Illuminati schema?
I guess they're roughly like they're sort of like a splinter group. Okay, so I guess that would be it.
Splinter Illuminati. Okay,
Splinter Illuminati.
So he became a 33rd degree black belt or whatever.
Well, it's like one of those cases in like the martial arts world where you have this guy who just pronounces himself like 30th degree black belt. It's like that. It's like Joseph Smith just pronounced himself 33rd degree Mason, except he called it Mormon. He's a 33rd degree Mormon.
Okay. Yeah, so he started incorporating these Masonic rites into his Mormon rites.
And then he got kicked out of the Freemasons because he exposed the rituals to the public and worst of all to women.
Yeah.
Because women weren't supposed to know that.
Yeah, pretty much. So some Mormons believe that the Masons had like the original ceremony that was traditionally held since biblical times, and it was actually instituted by King Solomon himself. Although over the years, the Masons sort of corrupted and changed the original ceremony, but apparently the Mormons claim that they still have the unadulterated, uncorrupted original ceremony. However, historical evidence shows that the Masons didn't even exist until the Middle Ages, which is about 2,000 years after the rule of King Solomon. So they definitely didn't have anything from King Solomon.
Yeah. Well, with all of this Masonic Illuminati stuff, I mean, you can't really let facts get in the way of all this.
You just have to accept without question, I suppose.
Exactly.
So in the 1990s, the LDS Church had to change around their endowment ceremony because of a survey taken in 1988 of about 3,400 members, and they were wondering why church attendance wasn't increasing as more, people were coming in and getting converted. Mm-hmm. And some of the things that were said in the survey affected certain practices being, I guess, taken out completely of the endowment ceremony, because one of the things is that when people were going to the endowment ceremony, even today, there's like zero disclosure beforehand about what's going to happen to you in your endowment ceremony. So some people just assume a lot about what's going to happen. So they think like, oh, it's going to be this real like spiritual experience, and it's going to be really uplifting to my faith, and it's going to be like a religious ceremony. And then they get in there and it's completely not. It's has nothing to do with religion for the most part. Other than what they tell you, it's supposed to it's supposed to do all this stuff, which I'll talk about here in a second. But some of the changes they made were that the Protestant minister was no longer referred to as an agent of Satan, mostly because a lot of the converts to the church were from other sects of Christianity. And like we talked about, all this is a lot easier to digest if you already believe in the whole Christianity, heaven, hell setup, So that's where they got a lot of their converts from. And of course, most of them still had fond memories of being Protestant. So when you call their priests agents of Satan, they kind of get upset.
Well, they didn't really let up on the Catholics, though, did they?
No, not really.
They still got a thing against the Catholics.
Yeah.
It's pretty hilarious.
Yeah. Another thing they had to change was the penalties for revealing what happens to the ceremony to anyone. So one of the biggest, I'd say the most kind of disturbing punishments you had to go through was a simulation of self-mutilation with fake knives and weapons. They were called death oaths. And it was a form of punishment where they would give you a knife, and of course it wasn't real, but it looked real. And you were told to cut your own throat and stab yourself and, mutilate your body.
What the fuck?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really disturbing concept. Even though the knife isn't real, the fact that it's real enough to the individual going through it, it's very, it's not a good thing to do psychologically, obviously. So people were actually having like really adverse reactions to doing this. And in fact, the Masons also took that punishment away from their ceremony as well. So both the LDS Church and the Masons no longer do this whole death oath thing. Even though it's symbolic, it was still very disturbing to a lot of the individuals who had to go through it.
Yeah. That's fucking weird.
Yeah, it really is. The other thing they got rid of was the 5 points of fellowship. And I'm not sure, but I don't think the Masons do this one either anymore. But basically, it's a position that two members had to stand in, or it was a position that a member and the officiate of the ceremony had to stand in, where both their right feet were touching, they were knee to knee, chest to chest, they had their hands on their back, and mouth to ear.
What?
Yeah. It was really...
I'm guessing a lot of people were uncomfortable with this.
Oh yeah, especially the women. The women were very uncomfortable with this.
Yeah, I bet.
Especially because they had to do it with male counterparts. There was no option where you could do it with a female counterpart. So
yeah, so this is the only time that men and women were considered equal. And this ceremony was probably created by a man. I'm just throwing that out there.
Yeah, probably. So those were some of the changes they had to make to the ceremony. But here's the funniest part of all this. So the whole point of your endowment ceremony, and this is also true with the Masons, the entire purpose is to teach you the secret words and hand signs and the tokens so that the members can enter celestial heaven. For the Masons, a lot of the reason that they teach all the secret words, the hand signs, and the tokens are, like when you have to go into a Masonic meeting, obviously, there's a test to see if you are a Mason, and they make you do all the hand signs and all the shit to make sure that you're one of them kind of deal. So it's kind of the whole secret society has, a secret way of dealing with each other to know whether or not you are who you say you are if you claim to be a Mason,
Right, so they're like a street gang.
Yeah, kind of like that. Yeah, same concept. But
That's awesome.
The LDS is different. So apparently when you die, and if you're part of the LDS church, or really anybody dies and you're getting sorted out into the heavens, but if you're being considered for celestial heaven, there are angels standing guard outside the gate, and they won't let you in if you don't know the secret passwords and the handshakes and stuff. So...
So what if you don't? You're just screwed?
Yeah, you just get fucked.
So you go up there and you're like, fist bump. It's like,
you forget the order.
No, that doesn't work. I wonder if you get a mulligan.
They send you into the outer darkness because you fucked up the handshake. Or you said the wrong secret word.
Yeah, it's a 3 strikes and you're out rule.
Exactly. That's all the Mason stuff I've got here. But another thing we found, this was actually a lot later, was a leaked LDS Bishop handbook. And you can actually find the PDF via WikiLeaks. That's where I did all my research, was just looking on the WikiLeaks PDF. And I picked some of my favorite topics that are covered in this handbook.
Okay.
We'll talk about polygamy and plural marriage and how that's supposed to be handled. Excommunication, abortions, transgender individuals, homosexuality, chastity, pornography, sex education, and sperm donation. So, yeah.
Well, they're really getting into it.
Yeah, I was surprised that some of these were in there. I mean, some of them they don't have a lot on, but I was just surprised that they mentioned it at all.
Mm-hmm.
So they talk about polygamy and plural marriage on page 33, and it basically just says adults involved in plural marriage or their children can't be baptized without approval of the First Presidency. So nowhere in this handbook does it say that the church officially opposes plural marriage. It just says that you might not be able to be baptized. So it's one of those things where they're not like taking an official stance against it, but there would be repercussions to somebody within the church who tried to do that kind of thing.
That's super odd.
Yeah, so I can't tell what their position is on this, but the fact that they aren't publicly saying, hey, we don't condone polygamy and plural marriage, I wonder how often people actually don't get approval from the First Presidency for baptism because they're polygamous.
I don't know.
Yeah, it'd be interesting. Because, I mean, if it's like one of those things where it's like, oh, it's got to be on the books, but, if we submit the request to the First Presidency, they're going to say yes. If it's one of those things, then it's like, well, then you're not opposed to it,
Mm-hmm.
So, next one was excommunication and disfellowship. And the most significant amount of information I found on this was on page 109. And it's kind of funny. The bits I want to talk about here are the fact that it's always mandatory for murder. So if you murder somebody, you're pretty much automatically excommunicated from the church.
That must be a new law.
I don't know. It didn't give the dates when they added this in. But it's funny because the next thing they say is it's almost always mandatory for incest. Like, like there are some situations where it's okay. Like there's some situations where incest won't get you excommunicated.
Oh, wow. Way to go, church.
Right.
2 thumbs up, religion.
Oh, man. The next topic was abortions. The information is taken from pages 34 and 185. And this is probably one of the densest things I found. No, sorry, the densest one is definitely homosexuality, but this is probably like the third densest. So on the topic of abortions, they say that if somebody who has had an abortion wants to be baptized, they have to get approval of the mission president after receiving like an interview. So they're like screened, and then there's a proposal put forth to the mission president, and then maybe you can get baptized. But the actual wording in the handbook says this applies to anyone who submitted to, performed, paid for, arranged for, or encouraged an abortion.
Okay.
So like had anything to do with it. So even if you were like encouraging somebody, they're still like, oh, can't get baptized. You fucked up.
Wow. What if it's just like in passing, like you're not paying attention, but nope, it counts.
Yep, you got fucked. So yeah, that's kind of weird. Because I mean, how would you prove that?
Well, it's probably more of a factor of not being able to disprove it.
I guess that must be how their legal system works within the church.
Probably.
Guilty until proven innocent.
I have no idea, but that probably probably accurate.
So it also says that abortions should only be performed by church members after consulting a bishop and having received divine confirmation through prayer. So,
we've seen how well that works.
So you have to get permission from God. And it says the only possible exceptions to the, don't get abortions rule are pregnancy from rape or incest.
Okay.
If life or health of the mother is in jeopardy. Or if the baby has severe defects that won't allow it to live past birth. However, none of these are exceptions which automatically justify someone getting an abortion.
Okay, that's not a terribly unique position to hold in America, I guess.
Yeah, and if you do it, you face disfellowship or excommunication, so... Yeah. Which, I mean, those are like 3 circumstances. Wouldn't you think that does give you automatic justification? Like, you were raped, you're gonna die, or your baby is gonna die, or suffer and die.
I mean, in an ideal situation, maybe, but I mean, this probably has some pretty horrible consequences, like in places where there's a lot of Mormons. Like, I highly doubt that there's adequate pregnancy resources for teenagers in Utah.
Oh, fuck no. Fuck no. That's what they had for abortions. Next is transgender individuals.
This should be good. Let's see.
Oh, yeah. So this information comes from pages 34, 41, 78, and 101. Or, sorry, and 111. And it says those considering or having had a sex change operation shouldn't be baptized, like, at all.
Okay.
And it says you need permission for the first presidency to get baptized in rare circumstances.
So you can have an emergency baptism?
I guess.
Okay.
Like, I guess they mean if you've had a sex change operation and you, like, then you want to become a Mormon, like, after the fact. Mm-hmm. You have to get approval from the first presidency to have it done. However, transgender individuals cannot be a part of the priesthood in any way, and they cannot receive a temple recommend, which a temple recommend is an ID card, and it's used for participation in temple dedications and for ordinances being performed in the temple, which are not open to the public.
So what the fuck is the point of being a Mormon then? Yeah,
so basically you can't enjoy, being in the church, being a part of the church, or anything having to do with the church.
Yeah, well, that's a lot of tithes that they're missing.
Yeah, I mean, you can only really attend sacrament. That seems like the only thing they're allowed to do.
Ugh,
yeah.
Boring.
Yeah, right. Now, if you're in the church and you're contemplating, not even getting a gender reassignment surgery, just contemplating it, you will probably have to go before a disciplinary council. So, yeah. They're not super accepting of this.
Oh, God. I feel so sorry for people who are transgender in places like that, born in Mormon faith. It must be so horrible.
The stuff I have on homosexuality and same-sex marriage comes from pages 94, 187, and 188. And this is really dense. So the first part basically says someone who has participated in homosexual behavior during or after the last 3 teenage years won't be considered for a position as a missionary without approval of the first presidency. And it goes into more detail. It says the first presidency will only consider giving approval if, quote, There is strong evidence of complete repentance and reformation, and if the candidate has been free of the transgression for a significant period of time, period of repentance should be at least 1 year, and maybe as long as 3 years if the acts occurred several times or over an extended period of time, or if the person was the aggressor.
God, that is... I mean, I've seen the Book of Mormon. I know that's not true. I mean, they can go on missions. That's for sure. I've seen it in the Book of Mormon.
So they go on to say, quote, a professional evaluation, normally from the LDS Family Services, and an HIV test will be required whenever a candidate has been involved with homosexual activity.
Wow.
They also make an exception for victimization or early same-sex experimentation, so long as there is no, quote, current indications of homosexual tendencies.
Wow, that's progressive for this type of religion. I can't imagine my old Baptist church being like that.
Well, it's a step in the right direction, I guess.
It's like, my 2-year-old touched a penis, stone him.
Okay, so the next part talks about the church's stance on all this. So the stance of the church is that homosexual behavior is, quote, contrary to the purpose of human sexuality, distorts loving relationships, and deprives people of blessings that can be found in family life and the saving ordinances of the gospel. And it goes on to say that people who are persistently gay or influence others to be gay will face church discipline.
Persistently gay.
Gay?
God, I just imagine like a little dog coming up and humping your leg. Ooh, he's a persistent gay. Oh God, they seem to think it's like an infection or a bad habit.
Yeah. Well, I think it's funny how they say, like, you can influence others to be gay, like hypnotism or something, you know? Like, if you let your guard down, those gays will get in there and influence you. So it also says that you can be forgiven through sincere repentance, though. So if you go through that process of repentance that we were talking about earlier, except for, like, apologizing for being gay and making reparations with people you've been gay with, I guess.
Probably finding a beard somewhere.
Yeah, something like that. Then you can be forgiven. Next part talks about if members have homosexual thoughts or feelings or engage in homosexual behavior, they can receive guidance from church counselors. And they may actually be required to go to professional counseling from the church.
Professional counseling for what?
For being gay.
Is this old?
It's 2006, so not that fucking old.
God, I was expecting like 1986 or something like that.
Well, there's only 2 leaked manuals that I saw. I think one of them was from I think it was the 80s or the 90s. I can't remember. But this is the most current manual leaked, because after that, the older version was leaked. They actually changed a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
And then the one that was most recently leaked, the 2006 one, had all the changes. So this is after they wanted to improve the image of the church and like, okay, guys, we need to be more progressive. This is them being more progressive.
Oh, no. This is terribly not funny. I heard that like there's like a lot of homeless youth in Utah, and apparently it's just solely because they're homosexual.
Yeah,
they're gay,
pretty much,
and that's why they're homeless.
Yeah,
and that's apparently a big problem down there. So this is all not funny bullshit.
Yeah, no, I've heard the same. So the next part is about how the church opposes same-sex marriage and encourages its members to, quote, appeal to legislatures, judges, and other government officials to preserve the purpose and sanctity of marriage between a man and a woman, and to reject all efforts to give legal authorization or other official approval or support to same-sex marriages. They also say that the powers of procreation are to be exercised only between a man and a woman who are lawfully wedded as husband and wife.
Okay.
That's pretty much all they got on homosexuality. They had a bit here on chastity that I thought was funny.
Oh, great.
Yeah, they basically are the whole abstinence till marriage stuff. But it's funny because they say adultery, fornication, homosexual or lesbian relations, and every other unholy, unnatural, or impure practice will result in church discipline.
Oh, judgy.
Yeah, I think that was page 187, 188, something like that. And then the next part was about pornography. So this is a good one. This comes from page 187.
Wasn't like the Pornhub statistics that Utah has the highest rate of usage?
Oh, that is excellent. That is awesome.
I have no idea if that's true or not, but I think it is.
Oh, that's great. All that sexual repression. I love it.
Mm-hmm.
So basically they say that the church opposes pornography in any form. So like pictures, websites, or like dirty smut books where it's just text, no pictures. So they say that, quote, pornography damages individual lives, family, and society. Such indulgences also drives away the spirit of the Lord. Members should avoid all forms of pornography and oppose its production, dissemination, and use.
Huh. Okay. So, I mean, I have problems with the pornography industry, but, you know, it doesn't have to, it's not inherently bad. There's bad things that can go along with it, but just, you know.
Well, I mean, the problems with the pornography industry are mostly having to do with, like, you know, human rights and, you know, the way the actors and actresses are treated. And, you know, it's a very rough lifestyle. You know, people kind of glorify it, but really it's super tough on the actors and actresses. And a lot of the time there's a lot of abuse that goes on in there. And, you know, if we didn't have the pornography industry, we also wouldn't have the snuff film industry, and that's horrible. But basically what they're saying, I think, is hilarious. That part about how pornography drives away the spirit of the Lord. Like, the Holy Spirit's like, oh, you're looking at porn? Oh, I don't want to be here. And he, like, fucking flies away. But, I mean, the biggest problem I have with this, though, is that they oppose the production, dissemination, and use. Like, use is one thing, but, like, production and dissemination, like, it's one thing if you don't want to watch porn, but don't affect everybody else's ability to watch porn. I mean, you can point out the problems in the porn industry, like practices and things that are going on there, but to just sit there on your fucking high horse and go, oh, well, nobody should be allowed to, you know, produce or even look at or use porn because I'm not doing it, so nobody else should. So it's kind of like, well,
now, excuse me, I'll be in the basement. Don't come.
Yeah, right. Don't commit. I'm praying.
Yes. It's my alone time with the Lord.
Right. So the next part is sex education, and we only have 2 of these left. So sex education was on page 188, and the church says that parents have the primary role as sex educators of their children.
Gross.
So it says, quote, where schools have undertaken sex education, parents should seek to ensure that the instructions given to their children are consistent with sound moral and ethical values. So basically abstinence-only education.
That's gross.
Yeah. So, yeah, this is them being progressive, mind you. The next part is about sperm donation, and it's on page 188, and it is literally one sentence. One sentence.
Ooh, does it? I hope it brings up the curse of Onan.
Oh, it doesn't. It just says says sperm donation is strongly discouraged. That's the only statement in the entire book about sperm donation.
Yeah, he was just like, I guess I gotta write something about this.
So that's all the topics. And there was one more funny quote I found in there. It was on page 174, and it was a statement from the First Presidency. And it was talking about the Bible and how they use the King James Version. And they said, quote, the most reliable way to measure the accuracy of any Bible passage is not by comparing different texts, but by comparison with the Book of Mormon and modern-day revelations.
Well, I guess that makes sense to them. That makes sense in their fucking worldview.
Yeah.
Weirdos.
Which, I mean, there's, like, what do you mean by, like, accuracy of the Bible passage? Do you mean to the original text? Because that's definitely not fucking true.
Yeah, that's probably along the lines of what they mean. Like, if you want the correct interpretation, you have to view it through the lens of the Mormon Church, which everybody says that about reading the Bible.
Well, yeah, because it's the correct interpretation. I'm talking about, like, do they mean that they want Bible passages as accurate to the original manuscripts as possible? Because if that's the case, then
I would say they probably mean it's accurate to Mormon theology.
Yeah. Kind of like how the Catholics do.
Yeah, very much like the Catholics.
Because I mean, if they're looking for like accuracy to the original manuscripts, that's definitely not how they go about doing that. So, anyway, that's all we got here. Thanks for listening to the Unholy Generation podcast with your hosts, Mike
and Ryan. If you want to contact us, send us an email at unholypod@gmail.com. And don't forget to check out our YouTube channel if we ever get around to using it. Like our episodes, subscribe to our channel, and share us on all your social media.
Follow us on Twitter at UnholyGens, like us on Facebook at The Unholy Generation Podcast, and follow us on SoundCloud.
And we are now on iTunes, so go look us up, get all our new episodes on your Apple devices, and leave us a good review and a good rating. And tune into our next show, which will be Conspiracy Theories. That's right, I was surfing the internet and I randomly came across this awesome conspiracy theory about Pink Floyd. So, tune in.